everyone, welcome to the 5 Beer Plan. I'm Brian, and this is the ongoing saga of an everyman's ale trail. In this episode, I'll use my bloodhound abilities to sniff out the importance of aroma in beer, finish up my chat with Stefan at Hoplore Brewing, and review Julebryg from Motorworks Brewing. In this segment of Tales from the Trail, I'm going to provide some more tips for the best enjoyment of beer. Join me now for another sensational segment. So here's a deep question for you. What is more important when drinking a beer? Taste or smell? Think about it for just a moment. Okay, do you have an answer in mind? Does anyone else remember back in the mid-70s when Miller Lite had the clever and wildly successful Taste Great, Less Filling campaign which lasted for many years? I have to admit I do, and my first thought to that question, which has been ingrained in me since childhood, is that the most important thing in beer has to be taste. I suppose if the only thing you're drinking are the mass-produced American lagers on the market, I can see that would make sense. However, we're fortunate to live in a time in beer history where hop reigns, and we don't have to settle for such aroma-deficient beers. One only has to look at the great variety and complexity in beer styles to know that there is so much more to beer than taste. Of the 4 main ingredients in beer, water, yeast, hops, and grain, the last 3 have quite an influence on what our sense of smell, or what you might refer to as nose, picks up. Take the Hefeweizen, for example. The yeast used in this German style of beer leads to aromatic notes of clove, banana, or maybe even bubblegum. The same goes for Belgian ales. The Belgian yeast used has a very distinctive fruity or floral aroma. Another example is the German Rauch beer. From first glance, it looks like a porter or a stout, until you bring it close to your nose and you immediately pick up the smoky profile that comes from the process of drying the malt over an open flame. I've talked about the Polish Grodziskie before. It has the golden-colored appearance of a pale ale or an IPA, but has a smoky profile aroma. The best example is one of the most popular styles in beer today. The American IPA, which is often brewed with New World American hops that are cultivated to impart and enhance the experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be a New England style to get some great profiles on the nose. Grassy, fruity, citrusy, earthy, and everything in between. The influence from hops can't be overlooked. If we get a little nerdy for just a moment, there are odorant aroma compounds called thiols contained in hops. Thiols make up less than 1% of the essential oils in hops, yet have a huge influence on aroma. To put it in perspective, I was watching a very scientific talk on beerandbrewing.com about these sulfur-containing compounds. The scientist in the video gave the example of off aromas in beer. If you've ever had a bad beer, you know what I'm talking about. Well, the compounds responsible appear in the range of parts per million or parts per billion. Pretty small. Thiols, in stark contrast, appear in parts per trillion. If you're having a hard time wrapping your mind around the numerical significance, consider this. Parts per million would be the equivalent of using an eyedropper to put 1 drop of water into 10 gallons of water. Parts per trillion would be the equivalent of putting 1 drop of water from an eyedropper into 10 million gallons of water. Now that's some influence. So how do we take advantage of the olfactory senses that we possess to get the most out of the smell of beer? My best advice is to slow down and savor the process of enjoying your craft beer if you're not doing that already. When you're pouring your beer, notice how it smells and what kind of profile it has. I've cracked open some beers that just flood the room with aroma, others don't. A trick I often use is to cover the mouth of the glass with one hand, and with the glass on the table, swirl it around a time or two, and then take my hand off, quickly taking a sniff. Another thing I do is to get my nose right into the beer without getting it wet, though I have to admit that it has happened before, and taking a sniff or two. And finally, there's another trick you can use to employ what is called your retronasal sense of smell. It takes a little bit of practice, but this can also help you get a better perception of aroma and in some cases give you a wildly different profile. Whenever you take a drink, try swallowing while keeping your mouth closed and exhaling through your nose. It's pretty wild. The only problem with checking out the aroma of every beer you drink in a particular sit-down session is that your nose sometimes gets acclimated to the different aromas. So one thing you can do is to put your nose on your arm, like your upper shoulder, and sniff and just kind of zero out your sense of smell with your own aroma of your body. And it actually works pretty well. I know not everyone feels the same way I do about the multi-sensory experience of drinking beer, and that's okay. In fact, there may be times when the enjoyment comes simply from the company you keep while sipping on that handcrafted brew. In this segment of Homebrew Hijinks, it's time to kick off my new homebrew project, my Passion Fruit Sour Ale. In previous episodes, you might recall that my original homebrew project was extract-based. Definitely good for the novice, as it just simplified the creation of the wort. Well, this time, I decided to kick up the complexity just a notch and go with an all-grain bill. As mentioned in my last episode, I found a pretty straightforward recipe from Joe Stang at beerandbrewing.com for this sour ale. It was a 5-gallon kit, so I scaled it down since I only have a 1-gallon fermenter. Just because it's good to plan ahead, I scouted out possible homebrew supply stores between Florida and Ohio. There was a really good-looking one in Knoxville, Tennessee, but the timing just didn't work out. So I looked ahead and found that Listerman Brewing in Cincinnati, Ohio also has a decent-sized homebrew supply. I've had a few beers from them in the past, but I've never visited the tap room, so I killed 2 birds with 1 stone. After a quick flight of beer, it was time to peruse the store so I could fill my grain bill. As I took a look around the store, I was a little out of my element at this point, if I'm being perfectly honest. Once Alan was free, he helped me get situated and showed me how to mill my grain. My grain bill consisted of German Pilsner, white wheat malt, and rice hulls. I used the digital scale to measure out the quantities and then used the mill to break down the husk to the correct size. Milling is done in order to expose as much surface area of the grain to the mashing process, because it is the starchy interior that is needed for the sugar used for the yeast feast. There were 2 different mills, one for light grains and one for heavy grains. The rice hulls were not milled. These 3 elements would eventually become my wort. Since I'm using a single 5-quart stock pot for both mashing and boiling the wort, I didn't really want to have to worry about lautering the grain. Lautering, if you remember, is a brewing term for separating the liquid wort from the residual grain after mashing. It can get sludgy in the bottom of the pot and be difficult to separate without some effort. So I decided to use the bag method and bought a brew bag. It's basically a mesh bag with a drawstring that will hold 2 to 3 pounds of grain and would keep all my grain self-contained for easy extraction. You might be wondering why rice hulls are added and not rice. Well, what I learned is that rice hulls are added to prevent the grain from clumping together into tiny balls, which would reduce the surface area exposed to the water. So I took my Pilsner, wheat malt, and rice hulls and gently mixed them together in the brew bag. This time around, I wanted to have a little more record of specific temperatures and times used for the mash-in. So I ended up using some online calculators from Brewer's Friend to determine the amount of water required and also the strike and mash-in temperature for my grain. The strike temperature, 162 degrees Fahrenheit in my case, is the initial temperature of the water when you plunge the grain in. It will cool off a certain amount due to the addition of the grain. The mash-in temperature, 154 degrees Fahrenheit in my case, is the sustained temperature you want for the mash process. Once my strike temperature was confirmed by a simple digital instant thermometer, I turned off my burner and added the brew bag into the heated water. I used a binder clip to attach the drawstring to the handle of the pot so it wouldn't fall in, and then situated the bag in such a way that the maximum amount of grain would be in contact with the water. I confirmed the mash temperature and began the 60-minute mash-in. I wanted to keep the temperature consistent without turning the burner back on. Again, since I'm limited, I improvised. In higher-end setups, you can actually buy a vessel that will stay heated at the desired temperature, or you can even get an insulated blanket to maintain the desired mash-in temperature. I simply put the oven on warm, which is around 200 degrees Fahrenheit, left the door open a crack, and covered the stock pot in hopes it would maintain the temperature. I checked a couple times and confirmed I was right where I wanted to be. Well, once the mash-in was complete, I also wanted to sparge the grain. This is just a final rinse of sorts to ensure all the good sugary content has been added to my wort. My stock pot has several different accessories, and one of them is a colander of sorts that sits on the top. Once again, I consulted the calculators at Brewer's Friend to determine what temperature and amount of water would be needed for my boil. So in parallel, I heated the necessary amount of water in a second stock pot to 170 degrees Fahrenheit. I then removed the brew bag from the stock pot and laid it in the colander. I poured the water over the bag while rotating it to ensure I got as much of the sugars as possible. I let it drain for a few minutes and let gravity do its thing. You never want to squeeze the grain because you might get unwanted tannins that could give you some off flavors in your beer. I then discarded the grain and got ready for my next step. Join me next time as I boil the wort. Now it's time for Barstool Banter. This episode, I will wrap up my conversation with Stefan King from Hoplore Brewing. Listen in as we talk about his favorite and least favorite beer styles, reverse osmosis, and a little beer fest they host called Lord of the Hops, which is coming up on May 6th. What is your favorite style of beer to drink?
Just like most brewers, I mean, I think to actually drink, my favorite style is just a nice clean lager.
Okay.
And that's what I've gravitated to more and more. It's hard for me to pick out a singular style though,
Mm-hmm.
because like I mentioned, I love the big stouts.
Yeah.
I love the smoothie sours that we do and sours in general. I've just become a fan of, the quote unquote all day drinkers,
Sure.
myself personally. And for a lot of these others, the big stouts, the smoothie sours, the wild sours, they tend to be more something that I'm going to do at a share
Mm-hmm.
and, do 4 or 6 ounces of something.
What kind of lagers and or like kolsches do you brew there at Hoplore?
Right now, we haven't really started our lager program full
Okay.
bore.
Okay.
We do a cream ale at this point, which is a little unique for a cream ale. It drinks almost like a pilsner. We're not going for a big, rich, thick, creamy type cream ale. I wanted something that was going to be more on the dry side, lean more lager like. Cream ales and kolsches are basically a hybrid
Mm-hmm.
beer. They generally are going to use a lager yeast just fermented at ale temperatures. But I wanted it to be crisp. I wanted it to be clean and come in right around 5% because we don't do lagers right now.
Right.
Our first lager we did was last fall. It was a fest beer, which is a style that's not really well understood. The fest beer is the beer that is actually poured at Munich for the Oktoberfest. Oktoberfest is a Marzen that typically is brought out around that time. But the fest beer is more of a Pilsner as well. It's a little lighter in color, not as malt heavy, not as much like brown ale, if you will, as far as flavor is concerned. And interestingly enough, we are brewing with 100% RO. We're kind of an oddity with regard to that. There's only a few breweries here in Indiana that brew 100% RO. But what that does is that gives us the ability to tailor our water to exactly what we're brewing. So if I'm brewing a Scottish ale, I'm going to use the water profile of Scotland. In this case, the Fest beer, we actually use the Munich water profile. And it came to a real crisp, clean, dry, just a little bit of that Munich flavor, and was really happy with the way it turned out. It's kind of an interesting one because there's some folks that just know the Oktoberfest and that's what they expect, even when you say fest beer. But had a Mug Club member that actually said he goes to the German American Fest in Toledo every year. And they actually fly German beer in overnight on ice for that fest.
Cool.
And he said that that's about the closest thing he's ever had here in the States to an actual German type of water profile.
Wow, that's high praise. So you mentioned RO. That's not a term I've ever heard before. Can you explain what the
Yeah,
RO
reverse
stands for?
osmosis.
Okay.
So basically, what we're doing is we're essentially wiping the slate clean of any dissolved solids that are in the water.
Mm-hmm.
So that way we can start from scratch and make the water whatever we want it to be, as opposed to having to compensate based on what's already there.
So you're adding mineral salts, that kind of thing, to try to get to the right kind of pH and acidity and whatever
Yep.
then?
Yep, exactly. We're adding for mouthfeel. The water actually has a pretty large contribution to mouthfeel.
Mm-hmm.
The bitterness is dependent on the dissolved solids that are in the water as well. So we're able to tailor, if we're doing a West Coast IPA, we're able to tailor it to bring out that bitterness. If we're doing a New England IPA, which is the opposite side, we're able to tailor it for that smooth mouthfeel that you want to get out of a New England IPA.
That's really cool. That's not something I've ever asked or been told that other companies have been doing. So that's really neat to know what you're up to. And that's probably why the flavors that you have are so solid and you can bring out, like you said, those big profiles. Is it like a hard process? Is it an expensive process to do the reverse osmosis?
Reverse osmosis systems are definitely not inexpensive,
Sure.
especially on the pro side.
Hmm.
On a home brew side, you can pick up a reverse osmosis unit for like under the sink for like 300-400 bucks.
Sure.
But right now we're on a system that will flow 1.8 gallons a minute of reverse osmosis water. So it's a much
Wow.
larger system than what you would find in a traditional like home type application.
Sure. So along the same lines, is there a style of beer that you don't particularly like to drink?
I don't necessarily have anything that I don't like to drink. I'm picky about, the technical stuff, obviously being a
Okay.
brewer. So I guess what I don't like to drink are things that would potentially have, technical issues with them. And that's probably my biggest thing. It's on a case by case basis. If I get something like a significant acetyl or something like that, acetaldehyde, all those type of off flavors are things that I tend to pay a lot of attention to in my own, but then I also pay attention to in other brews as well.
Yeah, it's definitely an occupational hazard, isn't it?
Right. Absolutely.
And that's one of the things as an amateur, as far as the beer industry goes. I taste a lot of beer, but I'm always trying to pick out what the flavor profiles are. Like the other day, I had the beer that had a lot of the diacetyl, the buttery flavor to it.
Hmm.
And for whatever reason, I mean, I know I've tasted that before, but this particular beer, it was like so front and center. It really blew me away because I've really never
Yeah.
had a beer that's buttery like that.
Yeah, and it really depends on style. I mean, as far as lagers, I told you I drink a lot of lagers right now.
Yeah.
The Czech lager is probably one of my favorites, your
Okay.
Pilsner or Kel. And as far as like diacetyl, for example, that particular style of beer probably has higher diacetyl than any other style out there. But with that particular beer, that particular style, it works.
Mm,
So what I guess turns me off about beers is if it's not supposed to be there, that's
yes.
where, and it throws flavors off. That's where those types of things come in.
Thinking about this, I think it was from a Rochester Mills, one of their milk stouts that I
Mm.
had, and I think it was like a cake or something, and it had that big buttery smell and flavor. So it was definitely intentional, and it was
Mhm.
enjoyable. But I can certainly agree with you there that if those flavors aren't or smells aren't there that you don't want them to be, then that's definitely an off-putting thing. I live in Northwest Ohio. I used to live in Michigan, so I've done a lot of exploring up in the greater Grand Rapids area. Been down to Columbus, Ohio, so I've done a lot of exploring there. So the Northeast Indiana area wasn't some place that I'd really explored a whole lot. One of the things I'd like to do is to go to beer fests and find local regional breweries because they all come together. And Lord of the Hops has been on my list for a number of years. Last year, I finally made it out there. And if you could see my shirt, I have my shirt on. Great time. I love the way that you bring together a lot of the regional Northeast Indiana breweries and even Central Indiana for that matter, because I think there were, what, 40 different breweries there this last year.
Yeah, I think about 35.
So it was cool to see, all those breweries together, get to try their beer, music, some food, bottle shares. It was a great time. Are you planning a 2023 event?
Yeah, we're working on it right now. The date will be May 6th
Okay.
this year. We're going to have a little fun with it. Every year we do a May the 4th release.
Okay.
Of course, that's Star Wars tied in.
Yes,
It's
sir.
called Java the Cow, and it's a big Imperial coffee milk stout. But this year we're going to go a little bigger with it. We're planning actually to do like a mixed 4-pack of kind of Star Wars themed beers. We'll be taking one that was kind of a variant of that Java the Cow. We called it Breakfast at the Cantina, Who
Okay.
Shot First. And that one is a milk stout, and that one has maple syrup and bacon in it as well as coffee. So that one's going to find its way to cans this year as well. We'll do a couple for Revenge of the Fifth, and then May the 6th will be our beer fest. So our character will be changing a little bit for the theme.
Okay.
We've always had the character, our kind of mascot, which is the hophead, but then wearing kind of medieval armor. We're going to take and play with that a little bit.
Cool.
I'm going to encourage people to dress up in their fandom if they choose. And it's going to be kind of a Star Wars themed version of Lord of the Hops. That's May the 6th. We're still in planning for that. We're working on bringing in some more out of state breweries. And so details should be finalized within the next few weeks. And then we'll start posting breweries that are coming and things like that.
Fantastic. I'll try to come out again. I know as a brewer, you get to share beers with your friends that are in the industry. I'm sure people bring beers in for you to try. Is there anything out there that you've always wanted to try but haven't due to distribution or maybe a seasonal nature of the release?
Trying to think about things that I wanted to try that I haven't gotten to. Yeah, I fulfilled a lot of that on a trip that I took between Christmas and New Year's. I actually had just finished up because November, December are big months for releases. The
Yes.
big stouts come out then. Our triple IPA, the West Coast triple IPA comes out then. So I had just wrapped up between filling in bartending and brewing and everything like that about 20 days straight. So I took a trip. I just told everybody, I'm like, hey, it's been a long month. I'm taking a week and loaded some blankets and pillows in the back of my Jeep and just hit the road. I ended up hitting a lot of places that I wanted to, or I haven't had a lot from. I ended up traveling 8 states and hitting 15 breweries that week.
Okay.
Spent a few days in Tampa and hit a bunch of them there in Tampa, hit Asheville, North Carolina, hit Nashville, hit Atlanta, hit Knoxville. I would say probably the one that stands out to me is one that I have not had much from that was kind of a bucket list place. That was Burial Brewing in Asheville.
Absolutely.
Um, Burial, I mean, top to bottom, I had stouts, I had IPAs, I had their lagers, solid top to bottom. Any beer you get there is good. So having a chance to try a bunch of stuff from them was really exciting. I'd had maybe one stout from them, and that's about it. Never had any of their IPAs or anything else. So that was a fun one to get to.
What are some places that you hit in Tampa that you always wanted to try?
Of course, Angry Chair.
Yep,
I've
they're on
had
my
stuff
list. Yep, yep.
from them on occasion,
Hmm.
but to actually get there and try some different stuff. I mean, Angry Chair is always known for their big pastry stout. So that's the only thing I really have had from them.
Hmm.
Then let's see, Woven Water. It's kind of funny. I went into Woven Water right when they opened, and I sat down and looked at their menu, and I was texting with my one bartender that he's been with me for almost 4 years now. And I was like, dude, this is crazy. I think that we're out of place. Like, we're a Florida brewery in Indiana. We do a blue raspberry lemonade seltzer for like our main seltzer that we do.
Hmm.
That was theirs as well. They did like 4 smoothie sours. They did 3 New England IPAs, a couple of clean beers, and the beer list was amazing. How much similarity there was between the two. Let's see. I hit Hidden Springs, hit Magnanimous, which is a newer one.
Yep, yep.
Their owner, head brewer, came from Angry Chair actually,
Okay.
and spent some time there. Arcane is one that I went to in Largo. They actually have ties to this area. One of the owners and the brewer, head brewer, is actually from South Bend originally. So
Neat.
had fun stopping in there. I didn't announce that I was coming or anything like that, so I wasn't expecting anybody waiting for me to come in or anything like that. But they just happened to be there brewing, and we hit it off. So hopefully in the future with the people that I've met down there, we'll be able to do some fun collabs
Yeah.
with some folks from Tampa. I have to say Green Bench was the one on the trip to Tampa that I was not on my list. But ends up I'm sitting at Magnanimous drinking the night before, and a guy comes in, standing next to me, has like 3 samples, and I'm talking to him a little bit about the lagers down there, and he says, "Yeah, I actually I own Green Bench Brewing, and if you want, some of the best lagers around, you need to stop in." And he was not wrong.
Nice.
Of all the places I went down there, his lagers were awesome, exactly what they're supposed to be. They have a huge wild fermentation space as well, which was also fun. I picked up a bottle that they did in collaboration with Central State Brewing. which has been gone for, I want to say, almost 2 years now.
Right.
But they still had cellared some of those bottles. So picked up a bottle that had ties back to Indiana. Chris was awesome. I talked to him about the lagers, because one thing I'm very big on is that if it's not right, I dump it. So with the lagering program and getting that going, one of the things that, as I mentioned, I'm very picky. I'm very picky about how that lager comes out on the other end of the lagering process. And if I don't think it's what it should be, if I don't think it's good enough, it's going to go directly to the drain.
Mm.
And so having been able to talk to him a little bit, and even have just that connection to say, hey, if I can ask you some information here and there, is that cool? One of the coolest things about the brewing industry is that type of camaraderie.
Yes.
And I had a blast meeting folks that were in the industry down there.
Awesome. That sounds like a lot of fun. So I would agree with you, and that maybe is part of why I really felt like I wanted to highlight the craft industry because of that camaraderie. I hate to keep bringing up COVID, but I mean it's part of our DNA now.
Hmm.
No pun intended. You hear stories of breweries offering their canning lines or offering supplies, all sorts of great stuff to help keep each other running and open, and that's where that resiliency and that creativity comes in, just trying to think outside the box and what can we do to just stay in the game.
COVID was an interesting time for us. It was one of those things where Indiana decided to shut everything down, and it was like a week later and everything was shut down. So it was a lot of teamwork. In our case, we had to basically scratch the business plan altogether and say, okay, how are we going to make this work? Fortunately, we made it through that fairly okay, and kind of moving forward from that. But I think that when you mentioned keep bringing up COVID, I think that the effects of the whole COVID shutdown and recovery are still something that is affecting everybody today.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. One last fun question for you, Stefan.
Sure.
If you were a beer, what style would you be and why?
If I was a beer, I'm gonna say barley wine. I'm I'm a big guy, so I wouldn't necessarily not to say anything about my beer belly, but I've earned it, honestly. But at the same time, I think that barley wine kind of flies under the radar a little bit. I'm a pretty chill dude. And so like you see me out at a bar or anything like that, I'm usually just kind of keeping to myself and just chilling out. And I think barley wine's the same way. Great beer just flies under the radar a little bit from what it actually should be. We took one to a beer fest down in central Indiana. It was Hoosiers Beer Fest, and we literally had to explain to people what a barley wine was,
Mm,
because they're so rarely made anymore. So I'll go with barley wine.
okay. I like a good barley wine myself. It's got a lot of flavor. It's a very interesting style. That's really
Absolutely.
cool. Well, listen, that's all I have for today. So I really appreciate you taking time out of your super busy schedule to get on the show here and chat with me. I look forward to maybe sitting down at some point, either at the mill or at Market Street, and having a beer with you.
Yeah, actually, absolutely. When you're in town, fire me off something, and I'll make sure that I'm around.
Sounds good. Well, hey, thanks again, Stefan. Really appreciate it. Keep up the good work there in Northeast Indiana.
No problem. Thank you.
Last call.
It's nearly time to wrap things up, but first, one more for the road. This episode, I'm drinking Julebryg from Motorworks Brewing in Bradenton, Florida. From the brewer, our spin on a wintertime Nordic spiced beer, this bright copper-colored saison features aromas of bergamot, lemon, mint, orange, and clove, with initial flavors of spicy pink peppercorns, followed by bitter lemon that's rounded out by a sweet orange character. The Julebach, or Yule goat, is a common figure in modern Scandinavian countries. Its earliest manifestations are rooted in the worship of Thor, whose chariot was drawn across the sky by a pair of goats. Today, small Julebach made of straw are a staple household Christmas decoration, good luck charm, and a Santa-like figure bearing gifts and good cheer. God Jule! Without further delay, Julebryg is a saison with a 7.6% ABV and 22 IBU. So I picked this beer up when I was in my Florida journey. It sounded interesting. So when I looked at the bottle, it said it was a cardamom and pink peppercorn saison. So that really intrigued me because I like spice and I like world flavors like that. If you recall from earlier episodes, saison is a French word for season. Though this beer is a wintertime quaff, it seemed appropriate considering the change in season happening even now here in the Midwest. A saison should be consumed at a slightly warmer temperature, somewhere in the 40 to 45 degree Fahrenheit range. So I'm going to go ahead and pour this out into a tall tulip glass. But it definitely has that nice copper color that it was described as. It has a fine white head and has a little bit of effervescence going on with it. So this episode, we're talking about aroma. And when I was thinking about this just seemed like a good beer to use for this episode. So when I just take a smell on the nose here, I don't really get a whole lot of aroma on the start here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take a sip and give this a little bit of a swirl. Wow, that has a great flavor to it. I would agree that it's definitely got some peppercorn and definitely has that citrusy flavor as well. Oh, that is rather good. So I'm going to go ahead and swirl this in my tulip glass a little bit here. I'm going to keep my hand over the top of it, and then I'm going to get my nose right down in there and take a quick sniff. Oh yeah, so with this, I'm definitely getting a lot of that spice that was described. Getting the clove, getting some mint in there, definitely some citrus. Gosh, that is so great. So as mentioned, it's only 22 IBU, so it's super smooth. There's just a tiny bit of bitterness on the end of it. So I actually had to look up what a bergamot was, and that is a type of orange, which is pretty cool. So definitely this is going to be very citrus forward, very complex. So again, it's got that funky saison nose, but I also get underlying notes of orange, of lemon, but it certainly's got a little bit of spiciness to it. And it's always pretty exciting to me to try something new. I'm a big fan of the saison style. Don't drink them nearly enough, but I think they are a super approachable beer. They can come in very mild, very mellow notes, or you can also get them that are more spicy, that have more of a hoppiness to them, which is also pretty tasty as well. So overall, this is a solid saison. I love the winter take on it and the spiciness. Motorworks, great beer. I give this one a solid 3.5 tasters out of 5 on the flight board. Cheers! Well, if you've got a beer you'd like me to drink and describe, leave a comment below. If you're a brewer and have one in mind, direct message me on Instagram and let's see what we can do. That's all for this episode of the 5 Beer Plan. With so many podcasts out there, thanks for choosing to listen to mine. Join me next time as I look into another popular hop variety, continue my homebrew journey, and kick off my conversation with another everyman, Trent Snyder from Bridge-Up Brewing. Remember to hit the subscribe button to be notified of new episodes. I'd love to hear from you, so please follow me on Instagram, 5beerplan 2022, and leave a comment to let me know whether you have ever used an all-grain bill for homebrewing before. Be sure to support your local breweries, choose your beers wisely, and drink them responsibly. Until next time, keep walking your ale trail. Stay thirsty, my friends.